A reading from the book of the prophet Daniel. In those days, I, Daniel, heard this word of the Lord. At that time there shall arise Michael, the great prince, guardian of your people. It shall be a time unsurpassed in distress, since nations began until that time. At that time your people shall escape, every one who is written in the book. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. Some shall live forever. Others shall be an everlasting horror and disgrace. But the wise shall shine brightly like the splendor of the firmament, and those who lead the many to justice shall be like the stars forever. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
A reading from the letter to the Hebrews. Brothers and sisters, every priest stands daily at his ministry, offering frequently those same sacrifices that can never take away sins. But this one offered one sacrifice for sins, and he took his seat forever at the right hand of God. Now he waits until his enemies are made his footstool. For by one offering he has made perfect forever those who are being consecrated. Where there is forgiveness of these, there is no longer offering for sin. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Lord, to you, Lord. Jesus said to his disciples, "In those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the end of the earth to the end of the sky. Learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, know that he is near at the gates. Amen, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. The end is coming. Well, at least that's what the gospel appears to say today, right? That the end is near. And indeed, it is. The end of the church year is very close. One more week, and then we're into Advent, the start of a whole new liturgical year. And every year when the church comes to the end of her year, she gives us readings about the end of time. A wonderful opportunity to stop and reflect definitely upon our lives, upon the quality of our lives. Are we living how we want to? All that sort of thing can very well take place at this time of year as we realize the end is near. Actually, one of my favorite comics about, that little guy who carries the sign around saying the end is near is, I don't know where I saw it years ago, but he's carrying this sign that says, the end is not near. You'll have to cope like the rest of us, right? Deal with everything that folds out in life. Remember the date I want to say it was May 11, 2011? Remember that date? Sound familiar at all? Yes? Yeah, there was a guy named Harold Camping who went around at that time saying that that was the date that the world was going to end. May 11, 2011. Didn't happen. So then he updated his prediction to October 11, 2011. Figured he was 6 months off. Still didn't happen. Matter of fact, if you go to Wikipedia, you'll find that not only was he wrong twice in 2011, but he was wrong once in 1995 and wrong 3 times in 1994. He just can't seem to get it. People have said that he's not the first to predict the end of the world. He just did it with more billboards and more RVs than anyone else and got the word out. It seems that Christians from the beginning of the church have always anticipated and looked for the end of time. And I mean, it even sounds like Jesus is looking for that, and Paul is looking for that in some of his writings. I think it was in the year 90 that Bishop Clement of Rome, only like 60 years after Jesus, predicted the end of the world was coming. Then there were other times that was sort of a popular thing, particularly in the years, 365, in the year 400, in the year 968, and of course in the year 2000. Remember Y2K? At midnight, all the computers were going to shut down, planes were going to drop from the sky, everything was going to be over, people dug holes and put buses in there so they could hide out. Yeah, it didn't happen. But there's always been a fascination with it, hasn't there? Always been some kind of fascination. When are things going to end? I think when people think about the apocalypse, if you will, or the end of time, they usually picture some sort of big explosion, fire and brimstone, sort of, this is the moment when all the evil people will get their comeuppance, right? And that's really not what a biblical understanding of the end of time or of apocalypse is like. The word itself is almost less of an event and more of a revelation. It means an unveiling or an uncovering. And what apocalypse reveals or uncovers for us is the trajectory of history, the trajectory of the world. In particular, that it's not about evil people getting a comeuppance, but it's about God's great mercy in vindicating and saving his elect. That no matter how bad it gets, God gets the last word. If I was to sort of summarize for you what all this end of the world sort of talk is about in the scriptures, it would be this. From the worst of times comes the best of times. From the worst of times comes the best of times. And you can hear that in the way that the church talks about things at the end of time or even at the end of our lives. We use images like soon and very soon. We're going to see the King. This time when there will be no more hunger or thirst on all my holy mountain, and God will wipe away the tears from everyone's eyes. There'll be no more sorrow, no more sadness, only joy, and I'll be forever in the presence of the one who loves me perfectly. And with that sort of setting, I kind of get why there's this great interest in when is that going to happen. Because that can seem so different than what our lives can be like. That if there was an apocalypse, there are moments when it would almost be a relief. It would almost be a relief. If you've ever been at that point in your life where you're just like, God, why don't you just end this now? Into our own lives come those apocalyptic moments, revelatory moments. Everything from, if it was all to end, I would no longer have to deal with the cancer that is slowly eating away at my spouse. I wouldn't have to be concerned anymore about the depression that my children just struggle with. That job that is just sucking the life out of me, that grind every day, it's done. The suffocating debt I'm under, over. All those self-doubts I have that torment me every day. Do people love me? Am I valuable? Do I make a difference? Done. If soon and very soon, wouldn't it be nice if soon I wouldn't have to see children in Africa dying from dirty water anymore or from starvation? If soon and very soon, then finally maybe sexual predators who feast on children, that's done. It's gone. It's over. Soon and very soon, the threat of war and Holocaust is gone. It's all gone. If God would just step up, bring it to an end, then there could be no more tears and no more sorrow and only joy. If only. If you've ever been at that point, then I would say you understand half of what Christ is trying to tell us when he talks about the end of time. Because there's another half to it. To really understand the apocalyptic literature that we're talking about today, you have to be like within a hair's breadth of despair, but sensitive enough to listen to and recognize where the Spirit is speaking and working, even in the midst of the uproar of the chaos. You have to be within a hair's breadth of despair, but still able to trust, to hear, to be sensitive to where the Spirit is speaking in the uproar and the chaos. Because without that, what's the only place we can stand? It's the only thing we have. So much of it is so beyond our control that despair is easy to collapse into. Indeed, Apocalypse presents events that affect everyone, a panorama of disaster. But not everyone reacts to that in the same way. And whether we're dealing with an apocalypse that is worldwide or national or local or in our own personal lives, the same is true. People react differently. You know, some people, things unfold in their life and they give in to despair. They grow angry. They become selfish. They shut down. Some even pursue suicide or other very destructive behaviors, getting lost in alcohol or drugs or whatever that is to try to relieve the stress and the pain. But that's not where we go. That's not where people who are sensitive to the Spirit go. Where do we go? Into the heart of the pain, into the heart of the suffering. We go into where the cancer is at, where the depression lives, where people are being crushed by the grind of everyday life. We go to where there are hungry people, where there are suffering people, where the sorrow is happening. Because that, my brothers and sisters, more than anywhere in the world, is where we need to boldly proclaim resurrection. There can be new life. It can be different. God wants it to be different. We don't hide in some upper room waiting for death to find us. We charge out into the world declaring that Christ is risen, and that changes everything, no matter how bad it gets. We don't wait for God to bring it all to some cosmic climax and end it. We try to be part of God resolving the difficulties and the struggles in the world. In the midst of all that, when life can feel so out of control, we are called to respond with compassion and with hope. But where do you get that? Where, when the world is falling apart and feels like there's nothing but darkness around, do you find compassion and hope? When you're on the brink of a maelstrom, how do you stand in that? I only have one answer for that. You stand in that. You find compassion and hope in God, in your own relationship with God, with the one who loves you perfectly and has gone through it all to the point of crucifixion and death, and yet found a way to bring life out of it. In the midst of it, it can be so hard to believe that God actually cares, that God is in control still, and that God can bring good out of it. So hard. And if you don't have some sort of dynamic, living relationship with Him, you'll never see it. You can't see it. If you're not sensitive to the movement of the Spirit in the calm, you'll never be sensitive to the movement of the Spirit in the storm. I've shared with you before how many times adults come to me, and I really want to be there for them and help them, and they're struggling with profound issues and questions. Parents have passed away. Children have become sick. Relationships are falling apart. Jobs have been lost. And they rightly and understandably ask, why is God doing this? Where is God in this? What's happening? But there's almost no context to answer them because somewhere earlier in their life, after confirmation or at some other point, they walked away from the church. They maybe didn't walk away from God, but they didn't pay much attention to God. Their spiritual experience was limited to, it's lovely to be out here in nature, but nothing that develops that lifelong habit of the heart that becomes ingrained in you, that connects you with the living, loving God that calls us to be His own. And so, when life happens as life does, they try to figure it out from the faith of an 8th grader or a 9th grader. And it just doesn't work because for 20, 30, 40 years, they haven't been attentive to that relationship. And so they can't understand. They can't begin to trust. They can't begin to just sit in the middle of the storm, sensitive to God's Spirit, believing the truth of resurrection and what will happen. The end is near. Probably not. Although we don't really know. I mean, Christ could walk through those doors before I finish the homily. The end is not yet. So how blessed are we then? That we still have time to, if not deepen, then begin a relationship with God, one with Christ. To be real honest with you, it's a great concern for me as a pastor that studies show the vast majority of Catholics don't even know it's possible to have a lived relationship with God. It's no wonder sometimes we don't hear God respond. We've not developed that relationship to hear Him do so. And we can do that. The end is not yet here. And if we do that, then when in our own worlds, in our own lives, the lights begin to dim and our own world starts to fade, we can have good and confident hope that we will see Him face to face.